And welcome to another edition of South Texas Crossfire. This is Attorney Joe Flores reminding you to join us each and every week right here on KTMV with the Lopez family. Special thanks to Don Humberto Lozano Lopez. He passed away in 2011, but he is honored and venerated, and we never forget him on our show. And also my very good friend Carlos Lopez. You guessed it, the Ted Turner of South Texas Broadcasting, and also our sponsor, God. Without this, nothing is possible, and we are very honored to have this opportunity to come out. And don't forget River City Hospice 882-5900 and Vasquez Flores Home Health 881-9922, who proudly sponsor this show. With me today, I have the distinct pleasure of bringing on Abel Herrero, who has served you all, and also in his capacity as a community servant and also up in Austin. Welcome. How are you, Abel?
Hey, Joe, I'm doing well.
Thank you for coming on.
No, thank you. Thank you for having me on as well.
Well, Abel, look, you're asking for the people's vote in November. It's a presidential cycle. A lot of people in South Texas in the past have said in the political tea leaves that it's a Democrats' race to lose, but that didn't prove true in 2010. We can't take the voter for granted. With that being said, I wanted to cover some areas with you in this show involving education, healthcare, and any other areas you wanted to talk about. But just to remind the voters, everybody knows who you are, but the voters out there and the young people especially, can you tell us about your education, training background, and your family?
Thank you, Joe, and thank you again also to La Familia Lopez for allowing us the opportunity to communicate with all of you.
Awesome people.
And I've known them for many years, and they're a big family. And you know, growing up as well in Robstown and in Corpus, my mom raised my brother and I as a single mom. And so in doing so, she instilled in us the desire and the work ethic that if you're going to want something in life, no one's going to give it to you. You got to work for it. You got to put the commitment and effort and dedication into it. And so with that motivation and wanting to do something good to help my mom and my brother, I did everything I could to try to do as best as I could in school. And I by far was not the smartest kid in the class, but I worked a lot and sacrificed a lot of time in growing up to make sure that the education that I received in school was the best that I could make it of that opportunity. And doing so, I was able to become valedictorian of Robstown High School class of '88. And in my speech, I thanked God for the opportunity to be blessed with such a great mom and family. And then also with the ability to understand and appreciate the fact that not everyone is given those opportunities. And I dedicated it to my mom and my grandmother and my aunt, who spent a lot of time in raising my brother and I when my mom was working 2 jobs, one of which was working as an elevator operator in the same building where I started my law practice. And so walking into that building, knowing that I was using the same elevator where my mom had worked, sometimes 2 to 3 jobs at a time just to put food on the table for my brother and I, you know, didn't remind me of or make me think of, oh, I've made it or anything like that, but it reminded me of where I had come from and how long and the commitment that it had taken for me to get to that point, and all the people that had made it possible. God's blessing put teachers there for me, public education teachers, teachers that spent day in and day out to make sure that a little boy who grew up in the projects in La Armada and in Robstown in the GI Forum actually had a fighting chance. That despite my not so proper English, that I still comprehended what 1 and 1 were and that it equaled 2. And that's part of what created my desire to try to help people, is the fact that were it not for them being there for me, I would not have been able to achieve anything without God's grace and their help and assistance. And that's what I want to do as a state rep. I want to continue to do what I had done before, which is to help individuals of different backgrounds. We've helped soldiers, teachers, families, individuals, and knowing what the legislature did this last legislative session to public education, just it hurts to think that other individuals that were in my situation as a child may not have those same opportunities because people have forgotten where they came from and forgotten that everyone needs a fighting chance. And if you give them that opportunity and you allow teachers to teach instead of teaching to the test, and if you allow teachers the ability to have the one-on-one communication with the student, and you allow them to, break free from the bureaucracy of standardized tests and the red tape that comes with, the state's regulations in a classroom, when you allow teachers to have a more one-on-one and instead an overcrowded classroom as it has been created now with this last legislative session, where you have a 1 to 22 student ratio. Instead, they're allowing waivers and allowing teachers to have to teach to more than 22 students, which reduces their ability to have that one-on-one communication with students, which is what allowed me as a child the opportunity to do well, and the motivation of knowing that I can be of some assistance to individuals and help them achieve their dreams and their goals is what motivates me, encourages me, and has brought me here with you, Joe, to ask for people for their support and their vote this election. And I know that together, if we work, anything and everything is possible through God's graces.
Well, and you're quoted as saying that every time a school is closed, every time a teacher is let go, that the dream of a child gets further out of reach. And what have you seen as far as you've been there in the arena, and you've been there in Austin, and you've passed legislation and been a champion for education and healthcare in the past? What have you seen that has changed that has brought about these cuts? Do you think it's in general the state of the country since 2008 and 2010? Some say there's an economic tsunami coming again at the end of this year in 2012, where food prices are skyrocketing 30%, fuel going up, and people are tired, frustrated, and lashing out and saying Obama didn't do half of what he promised. So do you think it's a combination of those factors that caused 2010, or put another way, do you think it was because the Republicans swept in here in Texas and cut those areas?
I think it comes down to priorities, Joe, to be honest with you. When the legislature goes to Austin and it convenes as a legislative body, knowing that it has, as it did in 2010, a limited amount of resources upon which to fund public education, to fund other programs, that what you do is when you have those limited funds, you make a priority list. And it's obvious that from the budget cuts that were made, that as drastic as they were to public education, that obviously those in the legislative body, this last legislative session in 2011, consciously chose not to fund public education.
Why?
So much so, Joe, that when you look at the amount of money that was not provided to public education, you have $5.4 billion that were not.
Why did they do this?
Because it's a conscious decision not to prioritize public education.
Why would they do that?
Well, because I think they're short-sighted. It's short-sightedness, because when you look at the student population in our public schools, you realize that the majority of our public students in our public schools are now Latinos, Hispanics. And when you realize that you have a young population that will become part of the workforce,
exactly,
and you then reduce the amount of teachers, because at the end what happened was, as a result of these $5.4 billion reduction budget cuts, you now have approximately anywhere, the estimates are from 11,000 to 15,000 teachers that were let go or forced.
And it's ironic to me that many of them voted Republican, and then they get the very people they voted in, voted them out as teachers.
Well, I mean, I think it's because some of them made false promises. Some of these elected officials that were running in the 2010 election said that their priorities were going to be public education.
And they lied.
And they lied, Joe, because when you look at where they prioritized the state's funds, it was obviously not in public education. You look at the fact that they've allowed now 11 to 15,000 teachers statewide to lose their jobs. You then force those remaining teachers to have to not only teach to a standardized test, work through the red tape of the bureaucracy, but then also have overcrowded classrooms. And so all the while putting these requirements that they have to meet certain standards. So when you reduce the resources, you reduce the time that they can spend with the actual child that is tested to determine whether or not they're actually able to retain the information upon which they're testing, you realize that the teachers are being placed in a very bad situation. All the while, it wasn't because somehow there wasn't this rainy day fund, which is monies that are set aside at a time when the state's economy isn't doing as healthy as it should be or where we would want it to be. Therefore, you turn to this money to say, let's supplant, let's allow the additional monies to come temporarily here in this area, public education, for example, if it really was a priority. But they chose consciously, knowing that those billions of dollars were set aside on the rainy day fund, not to use them to help allow for teachers to have the ability to have a smaller classroom, the ability of teachers to be free in their ability to teach so that the child can actually learn. Instead, what they've done is they've used smoke and mirrors, Joe, to use one of your terms. They've used smoke and mirrors in the sense that they've alluded to the fact that they've balanced the budget, but what they did, in fact, was some of the schools' funding monies are being pushed aside into the next legislative budget cycle. So what that means is not only have they not fully funded public education in trying to balance this budget, but they've also pushed aside a responsibility that they should have taken up now. Instead, pushed it on to the next legislative session. In other words, it's not my problem, I'm going to make it someone else's problem. In reality, as elected officials, we're supposed to be held accountable. We're supposed to be able to respond to people's concerns and constituency. And when you have a candidate that runs on a platform that says, education is my priority, but then they don't fully fund it, they don't make it a priority, they fund other programs, and then they push aside the funds that are needed to actually run the schools, operate the schools through the end of the year, and they push those monies aside to another budget cycle, to me is just inconceivable, and knowing that they consciously did it. And I say consciously because, again, they had the resources available there to do it. And the rainy day fund is monies that are set aside that draw in money from oil and gas industry, for example. And we all know, and thank God, that the Eagle Ford Shale is doing as well as it is, because Texas's economy is booming right now. And you see a lot of the oil rigs just driving from here to Kennedy or Karnes City or even San Antonio. You get to see all the rigs going up. You get to see some of these other businesses like hotels, for example, at full capacity. You get to see some of these other industries like trucking doing well. You get to see other individuals. I mean, you know it from just seeing the work forums that they're having, trying to recruit individuals. And I've talked to some of these mechanics and other individuals that have said, I'm losing my mechanic to the oil and gas industry because it's booming so much and it's doing so well that they're paying, a lot of money. Just the other day I heard that, and I don't know this to be true, but the person was telling me that they were at a Dairy Queen there at Karnes City and Kennedy, and that the advertisement was what they were hiring for new personnel, and for a cashier they were willing to pay $15 an hour. I mean, that just goes to show you how well it's doing. The point to all that is to say that those revenues generated from that industry supplant, they help refurbish the rainy day fund.
Sure.
So it's not to say, oh, we don't want to tap into this money because it'll be gone. The projections for the oil and gas industry are that for the next 8 to 10, maybe even 15 years, that it'll be continuing to do well.
God willing.
God willing, that's right. You never know, but given the projections, and that's what a budget is. You project what your revenues are going to be, you project what your expenses are going to be, you prioritize that which is important to you, and you fund that first.
Well, let's stop you right there. Look, bottom line, what I hear you saying is that they made bad choices. They let 11,000 teachers some odd go in the last
It was a
year.
conscious decision. Just like when we're at home. My wife and I, we've been married almost 20 years come January.
Lovely lady.
Beautiful, and I've been blessed
Every
extremely
time I see
well.
you're having another child. Number 12 now? Or are you competing with the Lopez family?
No.
But you guys are up number 5.
5. We have 5 children.
God, praise God.
And the point is that, we have limited funds just like everyone in the audience has limited funds, And what you do is you figure out, okay, what do I need for my family? Now, what do I want for my family? I mean, we want everything for our family, but what do I need? We need
Food,
shelter, clothing, food. Those are the things that you say, okay, of my $100 paycheck that I get, it's going to cost me $50 for food. Okay, you knock out the $50 for the food, you knock out, the clothes, the rent, the utilities. That's your budget. That's your priority. Those are your priorities. Well, what they did is they allowed, the governor's programs, for example, some of these projects that pet projects that, in my opinion, could have been delayed, not eliminated, but just delayed.
Like what?
Well, I mean, I think like what you have are the enterprise fund, for example. It's a governor's project. It's monies that are used as an incentive to bring businesses into Texas. And what we found out...
They don't need an incentive. They hear oil, they're coming.
And that's my point. I think when you think of things in a vacuum, you say, oh, well, I can't do this because it's going to mean why. What the point is that we're not in a vacuum. They had resources available. They had data available. The comptroller's office was giving them the projections of what the rainy day funds revenues were going to be at that time.
They got their priorities upside down.
It's exactly right. And it's not
education and health should be top of the pyramid, not the bottom.
Exactly, Joe. And when you look at health, you realize that the state did not fund, as it should, the Medicaid reimbursement rates for doctors. And I think most of them do it, Joe, because they feel like no one's going to hold them accountable.
They have a supermajority.
They have a supermajority, and what they did is they've in the legislative session, they pretty much ignored their rules and didn't allow for debate. It was things that were just shoved down people's throats. And at the end of the day, what does it mean? Seniors, for example, on Medicaid or in Medicare or both, are going to see a reduction in the number of doctors that are going to be willing to treat them, because doctors, and I've talked to them personally, have told me what happens now is if you have someone who has Medicare and Medicaid, they're dual eligible. If their bill was $100, Medicare would pay 80%, so that's $80 towards that $100 bill. It used to be that Medicaid would come in from the state's portion and pay the difference, the $20 to make up for the $100 bill. What is happening now with these budget cuts is you have Medicare still paying the 80%, but when it comes to the state's portion, what they're doing is they're using a Medicaid reimbursement sheet, a fee schedule, which means Medicaid will only pay for that amount of the bill that they claim is what it should cost. So if the doctor cost the doctor $100 to do a procedure or to do services for you, Medicare will pay the $80, but now Medicaid, instead of paying the $20 for the difference, is now going to look at the sheet and say, oh, well, you had this procedure. The Medicaid fee schedule says that it should only cost $85.
And that has nothing to do with Obamacare.
Has nothing to do with Obamacare. Has nothing to do.
Republicans, all they do is blame Obama for anything.
Right.
If it looks like a hurricane's coming, Obama's fault.
Right.
If it looks like the food prices are soaring because of world economics, Obama's fault. And I'm starting to think that it's not because of his rate sheet. It's because by virtue of his background. That a lot of these people have an issue with a person of color in the White House. I mean, I have never seen so much abject hatred and disrespect for a commander-in-chief as I have seen. I've never seen so many people that border on domestic combat.